We'd like to continue the conversation there, Bob. So we'll go to the panel and you'll be joined with Ciara Garvin, founder of WorkJuggle, Michelle Fogarty, co-founder and COO of Pep Talk Wellbeing, and chaired by Erica Riviera, co-founder and managing partner of Riviera and Fairer Advisory LLC. Our panel will discuss the challenges and opportunities of real-time learning in organisations. So please don't be shy, put your questions in the chat box because we will be posting those to the panel. Thank you.
Welcome, panel. We're really excited to be here today, really excited to get some conversation going around this topic. We have some questions coming in, which is great. Keep the questions coming. We want to make sure we answer those in this virtual environment and we engage in a collective conversation, as Bob has pointed out, being so important to us during this learning process. So one of the things I think that's great to kick us off with when we think about learning and development and all of the challenges that we have, not only generally speaking, as Bob pointed out, these are historical challenges, but the challenges in our current context. How do we get around this sort of transactional, one-dimensional model that Bob talked about, right? We've got LinkedIn now offering learning modules everywhere you turn. We've got, I'm sure everybody's getting in their inbox all these different learning modules based on whatever it was you happened to have Googled that day. And so now we have all this online competing information. And I'd love to hear from Michelle and Ciara, and then certainly Bob, what you think about the hope for different approaches going forward, given what we've all been learning in this difficult time in general around learning, but certainly over the last 8 months. So Michelle, Ciara, thoughts on that, and we'll come back to you, Bob.
Ciara, do you want to go first, or?
You go ahead, Michelle.
Great. I kind of feel like it's really hard to follow Bob because I feel like he stole all the good stuff and there's nothing left. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I guess, you know, I suppose the hope I have, or when I look at where we're at currently, I think Bob kind of hit the nail on the head, is that we just have to be so focused on performance, because that's really where everybody's at, right? Is the outcomes or the outputs of things. So, you know, like when I think about what the world of work right now and where people are at, there is such a delta between the very human skills, which we might have previously called soft skills. There's such a delta between those very, very human skills that people need. And I would argue, you know, without maybe having all the science there, but certainly 20 years in HR has taught me, is that the majority of learning discrepancies or deltas that exist in the workplace, they exist mostly because of either not necessarily a lack of knowledge, but maybe some of the human skills that we need to either be curious to get them, to get after them, to solve them. So for me, I suppose I'm really, really focused on those kind of outputs at the moment. What actually brings about real behavioral change? Because I think that's what people need right now. They don't need, as you said, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot going on, and people actually need less. And I think, again, Bob hit it earlier, they need curated content. They need curated ways of doing things. And I think, like, very much, and I know certainly for us at Pep Talk, the focus has to be around what brings about sustainable behavioral change, because the challenge for us is, in a very kind of one-dimensional or a linear L&D world, is that, you know, and again, Bob stole it earlier, but it's like learning is a continuum. And even if I know something today, I can forget it tomorrow, or maybe I don't need it as much today, but tomorrow I really do. And so for me, the greatest opportunity we have is to build environments where learning really is part of, you know, what we would kind of say the flow of work. And so to a certain degree, I think, you know, that has to be contextual then, right? It has to be, what do I need at this moment in this time? And also, I suppose the other thing in a kind of a one-dimensional learning and development environment, I think, is like, you know, what actually creates an environment that allows that behavioral change to embed? Because I think, again, every person on this knows, you know, we go off, we train people, and then they come into an environment that everybody else isn't calibrated on that change, or everybody else, or many other people are in a different place. So for me, it's got to be very much about, how do we make what they're doing relevant to today, and how do we make it part of how they work? And Bob did it so brilliantly. He talked about the kind of, the 3, 4, the in the blue. And I think, like, for us at Pep Talk, it was interesting because, while I'm a HR person, I'm not a purist L&D person. And I did the classic, which was what would solve for the problems, which is largely the blue stuff, right? And when you stop being obsessed with trying to solve for, I think it was it green, the other color you had, Bob? When you don't really care whether it's green or blue, and all you care about is the output of the performance, suddenly, for me as an HR person, it starts to push you to think about, well, what actually would just solve for that? And you get a bit less precious about how you deliver it then. I'll let you
down.
I feel like I've been...
Michelle, yeah, I think you hit the nail on your head in terms of your own points there. But I have to say, because I was thinking about that question, transactional, one-dimensional, and really when I think of the learning environment at the moment, I'm really positive about learning at the moment. Like, I cannot get over the hunger for training since, I would even go back to March. I remember thinking at March, oh my goodness, there's a pandemic here, everything's going to fall over. And it has been the opposite. We have never been busier at Work Juggle in the training side. And I just think that's incredible. And I think at the moment when people are under pressure, people are really seeing we have a real training need here. And how are we going to meet this with our people? Bob, I loved your presentation. And I actually had a question back to you, okay? Because I love this idea of embedding your learning in your workflow. And we do, at Work Juggle, we do a lot of things around inclusive leadership, right? And it's all about building a culture. And of course, that takes a long time. But for me, it's one of the key terms then is like that whole piece around psychological safety. Is it safe to fail? Is it safe to say, I have a problem with this? Is it safe to say, I don't like that term? You know what I mean? So to me,
I get it.
Yeah, and so that's what's so fascinating to me about what you're talking about in terms of all these learning on the jobs. And I can think of different environments I've been in myself where it was totally, if you made a mistake, you're going to know all about it. It was not going to be acceptable. And similarly, in my own organization, what I try, like, I'm always like, we make mistakes all the time, but here's the deal. Like, we are not operating on small children. Do you know what I mean? Like, any mistake we make, we're basically in tech and we will just figure it out. Everything is figure outable and nothing is terrible because we're just like, let's face it, like majority of us, we are just working in offices. You know what I mean? Like, you make a mistake, you go back, you say, I'm really sorry. And most people understand that, So what I'm interested to know is when you're talking about this workflow learning, I think it's really fascinating. How big a deal is it in terms of culture and that ability to make mistakes?
Oh my gosh. Kira, it's huge. I mean, because here's the thing. Back years ago, we got into learning culture, right? Everyone wanted a learning culture. It's funny because I was working with an organization once, and we were trying to get into that, and one of his employees said, no, we don't. Here's the problem here. We don't even have a learning culture here. And the CEO, God bless the man, spoke up and said, no, wait, we have one. It's just terrible. And so every organization has a learning culture. Right. And it's divided into some different parts. Some are very tactical, i.e. deliverables. But to your point, a lot of it's also very cultural. So in the journey to workflow learning, I so appreciate this question, is we have got to realize that part of the question is acceptability, receptivity. And you don't jump into brain surgery with workflow learning, although I've seen hospitals get close, candidly. We work with a large hospital here in the States that has moved to this, but listen to the word, over 5 years, and a 90% of their curriculum is there, but their first project was not brain surgery, right? Yeah. So we've got to do a couple things. We got to be sure that we don't bite off more than we can chew, and pick an area that's frankly fairly safe to fail. Period. Lots of 1, 2, 3s, and 4s, almost entirely, to be honest. So that although we've taught a class for years, we could really do most of it in the workflow, and that's going to be safe and receptive. Secondly, the critical skills rubric, you guys, for me has been so important because every SME thinks everything's important. But you guys, importance is not criticality of failure, right? And so they can't get over this. Whoa, wait. We can't cut the class in half. We can't do it because they have to, here comes the word, know everything. So we have to have a way, and as a crutch, I've used that tool to help sway the thinking of you guys. Look. We're not talking about skipping anything here. But what we're talking about is, let's agree in this room that the best place to learn, if safe, and we allow them, Kira, love your point about culture, in the workflow, but we have to agree as a group on what goes there and what doesn't. And the critical skill rubric allows us to have this conversation about what is truly safe. Let's let them be okay there, and start shifting this culture to one that makes it acceptable. Terrific, terrific question.
Let's combine some of these thoughts, and thank you. The audience is bringing in some great questions for us. So when we think about either being an HR leader and having to design these programs, right, or being the line manager that has to figure out how to create psychological safety, and then at the same time create this learning environment given all the challenges we have right now, and that varies across state, across borders, oceans, etc., right? What do we do to get to Michelle's point, this behavioral change component, right? And we know that's the hardest part. Michelle, you brought this up, and Bob, you've said this earlier in your talk, right? The challenge is not that the information isn't there. It's how do we infuse that in a safe and engaging way that allows for mistakes and learning, to Kira's point, and get to this behavioral change, right? Because I'll add that in point as a psychologist, that's our greatest challenge. And that goes even when we're getting this enormous amount of time with leaders to do one-on-one ongoing coaching, right? So we have the same problem as we move up in organizations, and you get a depth of one-on-one face-to-face coaching in most cases. How do we get this behavioral change across very large populations that are doing really hard work in the front lines and are now even have a greater challenge and barrier to getting that experience? Would love to hear your thoughts from the three of you, coming from really different yet related areas. Bob, you want to jump in there? We've got you.
I'll go real quick. So. Yeah, you guys, here's the thing that's exciting about this. Remember I said opportunity acceleration. Opportunity and acceleration. We can't miss this opportunity, friends, because two things are happening right now. We have a very receptive learner right now who's struggling. And when someone's backed up into a corner, unfortunately, they also will do remarkable things. And the receptivity right now, friends, to change is remarkable, because change is the norm, right? And back to leaders. Leaders are very empathetic right now. There's a lot of research about it with what's going on in the field. They get it, right? They're hearing it every day. They hear the kids crying in the background while they're trying to get their word. They get this. So this is a time for us. But here's the thing. We have to answer that empathy and that openness with structure. We have to have a way to say, look, let's try this. All right. And to your point, Eric, I'll say one last thing is the thing to be careful of here, friends, even though there's a huge need, is, you boil the ocean, you're in trouble, right? So you got to pick your battles here, in where you start. And so find the more receptive the points of pain, but not deadly, right? And build solutions for that. And here's the thing, what we've seen happen is once you meet a need, the acceleration with this, remember the other word, opportunity acceleration, is insane, because they're grasping right now for anything that works, if that makes sense.
And you know what, Bob, just to build on that, you made a couple of points there around opportunity and acceleration, and that's what we see all the time. People are now completely open to things they haven't been in the past.
Great.
And when you talk about empathy, I mean, resilience, there has been such a focus. When we're doing some interesting research with DCU at the moment, we're talking to all these top HR leaders in focus groups, and it's just so interesting. And a lot of them head up their L&D organizations, and it is all about resilience, mental health. How are we helping our people? That is what is just coming through. And we're not asking them that question, but this is the answer they're giving us to when we ask any kind of a question. And then the other thing I find really interesting is at the moment, people are just sharing so much. And I think it is because, people are that little bit more isolated. They're a little bit more open. People are being very open and sharing what's happening in their organizations. So just to build on your point, Bob, in terms of opportunity and acceleration, and people even talk about like the new normal, like we're not going back to what it was before, and we've all seen into each other's homes now. We've all have a much better understanding across all areas of society of everything we're all managing. And I'm really positive. Positive. I've seen so much positivity out of the last, out of the conversations we're having with companies, and out of companies are doing more for people. Like I've seen companies really understanding the people in their organizations on a whole other level than I've ever seen before. And it's really heartening to see that.
It's amazing.
I'm going to jump on that, Kira, as well with another question. And Michelle, come back to you. But Kira, this is something we and all have talked about already. And we have a question from the audience. How, when you think about the delivery of these processes, Kira, how have you adjusted, and give people some ideas? I know your organization has done some great things with flexing to what we see being in people's homes, right? And this new normal and these new challenges. So tell us a bit about how you get that learning environment, given the challenges of time and attention in all of our lives that existed before and certainly exists in multiple ways now.
Sure. Well, I suppose I might just talk about a real practical example, if that's okay. So back in April, where, Erica, in, middle of March, Ireland went into lockdown, so everything shut, and we launched a virtual training program, first time ever doing it 6 weeks later, right? So I still have the gray hair in my head from that one, but we learned a huge amount. But one of the things we did was, and this is really basic, but we went back and we said, so what we were doing is we were doing a training program that was funded by Technology Ireland Software SkillNet, but it was for women at home returning back into tech. And so you had to think, okay, so these women are going to be at home, their children are all going to be at home with them while they're doing this training program, right? Like, this was never the deal. It was always everybody went into a nice, really snazzy office, and we were going to do it in host organizations, and so that was all gone, and everybody was going to be at home with their children. And of course, people were all over Ireland with different levels of broadband. I mean, it was a huge step into the unknown for us. But I think a couple of things really worked. And one of them was, I love getting a piece of paper in the post, getting a handbook in the post. I think tech is a tool, it's not everything, So to really step people through, I have this on paper. I'm not reliant on my broadband. I can see what it is I need to do. But the other thing we did that really flexed it was, it was really obvious that the mothers had gone from being full-time with children to being, to being on this course 9 to 5. And very early on, we decided that wasn't working. So what we did was we started having an intense, let's say, tech skills morning, the afternoon off to have with your kids, and then to come back in the evening, 6 to 8, when kids were being put to bed, and have more kind of like an MBA style lecture, something a bit lighter for 2 hours. And we got great feedback from that. And then again, that's that whole home work-life blur we're all seeing. And I really hope that we stick with that. I hope that, I don't ever want to do that kind of 9 to 5 again if we don't have to.
Right. Yeah, it's a great adjustment, right? And it makes such sense. It works for everybody. It works for the organization. You're getting more out of that learning, to Bob's point, right? You're reducing the stress of the employee as well. And Michelle, I've got this one reserved for you, building on what Kira has said. I know with Pep Talk, there's a lot on not only organizational platform and opportunity for development, but also this personally engaged learner who's looking to learn more. As Kira said, people are motivated now themselves, right, to figure out all these different ways to cope, and they're absorbing everything everywhere they turn. And so for you, when you think about the focus on self-development and managing expectations for yourself, but also your organization, where is the responsibility there versus the responsibility of the organization to enable that self-learning? And that's a great question from our audience.
Yeah, particularly around when there's any mention of the word well-being, which I actually hate the word because nobody knows what it means. It's such an inflammatory word. I get this question a lot because people say, well, is it not your personal problem, somebody's well-being? And I guess if I take a step back, I don't really care whose problem it is, but I know the effect of it. And that's back to Bob's kind of pitch at the start, right? Which is if we want programs that are effective, then we need to think about where people are coming from. So if we take something simple as, somebody's cognitive skills when they're dehydrated, somebody's cognitive skills when they're going through a big emotional issue, somebody's ability to perform if they've had less than 4 hours sleep, right? I mean, there's tons and tons of science behind how proper well-being, and I don't just mean drinking kale smoothies and going to the gym, right? There is proper science there that shows the impact behind those things. So for me, I guess where I kind of start with is like, if you look at, performance in an organization, there is the marriage between the organizational well-being, right? The degree to which, I have purpose, I have a vision, there's a mission in an organization, we have good leadership, good management structures, good tools, all of that stuff. And then the personal well-being, which is, my ability to be physically, mentally, emotionally ready to work, right? And that includes being able to have difficult conversations and all of that. So for sure, like, of course, no organization can or should own how a person enters or approaches their own learning and their own development. But I think, to Ciara's point, there is a huge appetite for the most part about it. And I think what we've learned, in terms of how best to bring that to life, it really is by bringing it into the flow of work day to day. So for example, when I look at Bob's kind of in the blue, there is so much where people can learn and develop, and they can do it, in cohorts. They can do it organizational wide, they can do it in teams, they can support each other. Like, I know, for example, on our platform, there is a load of different ways that they can actually demonstrate themselves bringing the behavior to life, whether it's through video, through photos, through text, through accountability, that kind of stuff. And also the realm of user generated content, because I can tell you guys, once you start to look at the stats around user generated content, it will scare the pants off anybody, because that's what they're watching, that's what they're looking at, and that's where they're learning. And for anybody who's ever read that book, The Wisdom of the Masses, right, is like, for the most part, you can't go that wrong, right? Like, negative speech will tend to drown, or positive speech will tend to drown out negative, But I think that the big thing for us has always been about, trying to bring that, so who owns it? Well, absolutely, the person owns their own personal development. But I know, for example, for us, bringing that alive in the day-to-day conversations with managers, with leaders, they don't need to be experts in the area, but they just need to be able to open the conversation and let that flow. That in itself starts to shift the culture more than any top-down culture change program that I've certainly been part of in the 20 years I've been a HRD. Because culture is, we all know it, it's not what's on the walls, right? It's what's walking in the halls, it's what's happening day to day. So do organizations own it? No, they don't. But would a smart organization take account of it and work to put solutions in? Hell yeah. Like, for anybody who's been a high performance athlete, they know that, right? It's more than the technical skills.
I guess, Erica, the only thing I'd add real quick on the place to pivot quickly, if the audience is wondering about that, is that for this thrust into virtual has given us, back to the word again, an amazing opportunity. And the one thing that we've learned, now that we've been in this a while, is that people can only do this for so long. This conference is only going a half day for a reason, right? This keynote's an hour long for a reason. They ain't going to sit there for 6.5 hours like they used to, with breaks and lunch in the middle, right? So here's what it's done. It's built time into instruction. It's forced us to stop. I love Ciara's example of stopping for the mom to deal with life and let her process. But here's the thing. When she left that morning session, she didn't turn that off. She processes that and she thinks about it, and now she's a mom, and she's trying to, and that carried into her. Here comes the word apply. It carried into her workflow. And then when she regrouped in the evening, she'd had time to take a breath. And now she says, okay, look, I've tried. I failed. I thought about this. I have an opinion now. These are the things that classrooms of the old didn't allow us to do, because we just went through things so quickly and covered so much stuff. So you want to build workflow learning into your instruction, use what we're getting right now, which is virtual, and space it out over time. And here's a simple thing: give them homework to do in between that requires them to apply, not memorize or test. Apply what they learned, give them support while they're doing it. And then when you come back, talk about what happened, where they failed, what went great, and then do your next lesson. It's a remarkable way to ease them into the power of the workflow part of learning, not just the lecture part of learning.
That's great. Yeah, great point, Bob. We've got about 4 minutes left, and I'd love to give Ciara and Michelle these last 2 minutes, building on Bob's point just now. When I think about this whole concept of time to process, right? We've inadvertently, with our global pandemic, had a solve for this information highway or information bombardment, right, that we've had in our world. And so that's a great example. And Ciara, you gave a great example of what you're doing. But just as a summary for both of you now, Michelle and Ciara, when you think about the greatest outcome of this challenge and how it has changed learning and engagement? What do you see? What's exciting? What resonates?
I'm just I'll talk, I know we're cut on time, but Anne mentioned just before we came on, she had this great phrase, connection before content. And I think that's it. To me, that just sums it all up. It's about that trust. It's about psychological safety, and it's about looking at everything with new eyes. And I think there's huge positive, there's huge positive outcomes to come out of this. And I think learning is always such a shining light at a dark time, and I really hope that any learning or training we do is that for people. So I think we're re-looking at everything, but I would actually quote Anne at the start, connection before content. We go down a rabbit hole of tech, or we go down a rabbit hole of only virtual or learning management systems or whatever. It's only ever going to be an enabler. It's all about, it has to be all about the people. That's what I would finish on.
Yeah, and Erica, I can't probably add much better than that. I mean, I think the thing that's been missing in the world of work, and I don't really care whether it's online, offline, or in the middle of the lines, is humanity. We have systematically stripped humanity out of the workplace. And I think if COVID has done anything, it's thrust us back into the reality of that. And Kira made a great point, like tech is a delivery mechanism. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a very powerful one. But really, I think for me, what excites me is literally the recognition that it's not about, in the past, there's always been the discussion, particularly at the C-suite where I've sat, it was almost like people were a hindrance and stopped the progress of technology. And actually, it's about understanding that people and technology combined can create and do great things, right? We know the reality is that AI is here, the robots are already here, and jobs are changing, right? So what we need to focus on is those uniquely human skills. And I think, if there's one positive with COVID is that it has pushed those unique human skills right to the forefront. I guess what I'd personally like to see, and my challenge to, I suppose, what I would say HR and L&D colleagues is that we would approach it in a more human way, and we would inject more fun into it. For some reason, guys, I don't know what happened in L&D, but it stopped being fun. And why? So I think that is my kind of challenge to all of us, is to make it fun and accessible and something that we want to do, not we have to do. I get what you're saying, Kira, like a beacon of light, but actually, why can't it just be a bit more like brushing your teeth, part of your day, a bit of fun, a bit of a lift? Because that's back to, I'd rather not be learning to swim, not to drown, even though that's really practical, but so I could go down your daughter's water slide, So I think that would be where my mind goes to when I think about where we can go with this.
Great, thank you. It feels like we've really brought this home, right? So some great points here. Thank you. And Linda, back to you. This has been a great panel.